Well, greetings, friends. Welcome to another countdown to his coming. We are right here in the smack dab middle of July. I'm recording this on July 15th, 2023, and I want to talk to you about this culture of deception that Jesus predicts for the last days. We've always had that deception by people who want to turn you away from the truth to lies and fables, but it'll be especially bad in the last days. How do I know? Well, because Jesus said so. Now, we're going to talk about this culture of deception and then hang on to the end if you want to know the best and worst places to live in the United States of America. We're going to compare notes and see what's being said versus the truth. Well, as you get to Matthew chapter 24, Jesus talked about some things that would take place in the last days before he returns. And he says in verse 10 of Matthew 24, this is the Olivet Discourse, that many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Boy, don't we see that happening all around us. And many false prophets will rise up, deceive many, and because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold. Now, lawlessness multiplying is something we've seen happen all across our country in particular, many parts of the world, these last few years. It seems to be intensifying. That which we've always considered to be a standard of law, much of which is based on the Ten Commandments, is now being thrown to the wolves. All around our own country, everything that used to be right is now wrong. Everything that's wrong is now suddenly right and is paraded in front of us as some kind of virtue. And if you don't agree with it and you don't virtue signal along with them, then all of a sudden you are the enemy. So it's amazing how all of this has taken place. And Jesus, in referring to lawlessness, gives us the idea of someone that eventually will come and be what Paul describes as a man of lawlessness, a leader who's going to lead into this kind of cultural rejection of everything that is godly. Now, it says in particular that because this is multiplying, the love of many will grow cold. In other words, there's a basic love of humanity that can be seen among all of us. Something that's natural, especially the love of a parent for a child, for example. The love of those who have friends and family who they are attached to. But this wedge being driven in between families, being driven because of political affiliations and fads that are being presented as truth that are ungodly, allows a wedge of destruction to be driven into families, into community groups, even into churches. And all of a sudden, people who used to have this natural love abounding in their lives are just throwing it all away. In anger and bitterness, now hatred is becoming a fad that's okay if you're pointing it to the right person or the right groups of people. And so here we are with a change in culture unlike anything we've ever seen, especially in our lifetime. If you're like me and you've been around a while and you've seen it change, it's astounding. If you think back 30, 40 years even to what was a cultural norm, it's all been turned on its head now. And here we see, especially in some recent developments, exactly how bad it can get. Jim Caviezel stars in a tremendous movie. Sue and I saw it at the theater along with a packed house of other folks who clapped at the end. A movie that's entitled Sound of Freedom. It's the kind of movie you'd think everybody would support because that movie is against the sexual exploitation of children. It unmasks it and really gives you something to cheer about and shows how good can win in the end. It's one of those feel-good movies, and it's based on a true story. And yet immediately there's a group of media outlets that are far leftist, Marxist, that we used to consider in the mainstream, like the Washington Post, sorry. But these all had talking points handed down to them, and you could see it in each one of their articles while they were mimicking each other and using phrases like QAnon conspiracy and all kinds of stuff like this to point out what was wrong with this movie. Some kind of right-wing banana republic kind of thing going on. Well, What amazed me the most is that here's something that should obviously be supported by everybody, but yet is being attacked by a group of people. Why would you think that to be the case? Well, it translates into real life. If you live in California, you've watched the terrible situation going on over there as a bill was just presented and overwhelmingly passed in the beginning at the California Assembly, which would make, I can't use certain words, by the way, because it gets picked up by the algorithm, but makes certain crimes against children, just like you would have seen in the movie Sound of Freedom, makes them a felony and allows for stronger punishment. And most of us would stand up and cheer for that and say, yes, why haven't you already done that? Well, this bill was blocked by the Public Safety Committee. 100% Democrats blocked it in California and wouldn't allow it to even be brought up for a vote. The folks who are victims of those kind of crimes, who are watching this in the public assembly, broke down in chambers, some of them weeping openly at why in the world you would block a bill like this. Well, that's a good question. Yet we're seeing this happen over and over again. As we think about how painful this can be, keep in mind that Sound of Freedom was a movie originally put together by 20th Century Fox, which of course was absorbed by the Disney Corporation. The Disney Corporation refused to release it. They wouldn't have anything to do with it. That's when Angel Studios picked it up and passed it along. Now, why would a corporation like Disney, who you would think is all for the protection of children, why wouldn't they release such a movie? Well, they're too busy releasing other kinds of films. It's true that Disney Plus has now green-lighted the production of a movie entitled Pauline. In case you haven't heard about this, according to Deadline, it's a German original series about an 18-year-old girl's love affair with Satan. Of course, Satan gets her pregnant, and you can just see where this storyline is going. It's described as yet another coming-of-age flick from Disney, and all of these recent ones from their portfolio seem to be filled with same-sex themes, witchcraft, violence, and sex, all targeting youth. What's going on here? Are we trying to groom our youth for an entirely different kind of culture that totally rejects God and all his standards? Yes, and unfortunately it's been going on for some time right under our nose, and we haven't even paid attention to it. And so the people that are trying to do this are naturally against films like Sound of Freedom. Wow, the love of many has just grown cold, hasn't it? Now, keep in mind, if you're in California, if you're still there, I'm amazed. If I were there, I'd be figuring out how to get out, especially if you have children. You say, well, I can homeschool my children. Yeah, but your children are going to have to hang around some of these kids that are not homeschooled or not Christian schooled. And even your Christian schools are now under attack because in the state of California, parents are now being demonized if you will not go along with the fantasies of your children that have been pumped into their head by alternative media and alternative sources and TikTok and everybody else, that they might not even be the gender that they were born. And if you don't support transitioning them, you now as a parent are considered a child abuser. California is saying we now have the authority to take that child away from you. Child belongs to our state, not to you as a parent. And this thing is going completely wild. California is turning into Sodom and Gomorrah times 10. And as we see this happening, what's the result? What do people want to do? Well, good and godly people want to either get out of Dodge or else stand and fight till the last stand, till the last blow. And many are now discovering that the state of California is perfectly willing to persecute them for their Christian beliefs. Well, I could go on about that for a while, but friends, it gets pretty nasty as we see this culture of deception that tries to just lie openly and brazenly, as we've seen our own president's administration do now since he took office. Just say the lies out loud, say them loud and long, and hopefully someone will believe them. It's almost out of the playbook of Adolf Hitler from 1930s Germany. And the lies keep being pumped out there over and over and over again. And if you stand up against them, you are the troublemaker. Well, this particular culture of lies means that the love of many is just growing cold. We're tired of it. All of a sudden, hatred and vengeance begins to fill the hearts of even good and godly people who don't know how to react to such things. Thus, the culture that Jesus predicted would be here just before he returns. It's the same kind of culture that Paul predicted in his letters to Timothy. And he said, watch out, because in those last days, perilous, dangerous times will come. And he talked about one of the key elements to that. He said, because men will be lovers of themselves. It's all about self-love. There's no godly love. There's no love for others. It's all about number one right here. The God we've really put on the throne is now the God of self-indulgence. And that God even attacks little children if that's what it takes. Now, as we see these things developing, you would think that, of course, people in a country like the United States would respond, and they have. If you've been following like I have, where people are moving to and moving from, you can gather that there's some popular places and some unpopular places. But guess what? Those in the leftist media want to deceive you even further, will even fight those ideas. Now listen, I read an article this week that I thought was amazing, astounding, that it could even get out there and anybody would publish it. It came from CNBC. And on CNBC, of course, you know where they come from. Parent company is NBC. They're in that same group with MSNBC. So you can guess their direction coming from the far left. Well, they published an article by Scott, and I think you would pronounce his last name, which is C-O-H-N. It might be Con, might be Cone. I don't know. But Scott puts this article out entitled, "These are America's 10 worst states to live and work in for 2023. Well, the 10 worst states, you and I could name at least 5 of those right off the top of our head, and California would be at the top of the list. My goodness, you can't go to San Francisco like I saw a friend do the other day without having to dodge needles and human feces on the street. Stores closing up because they can't exist anymore because of the shoplifting that's no longer protected by law enforcement. Looking at Los Angeles falling apart, 50 Cent made his comment this week about how they once again have done this thing where there's just no bail. They release felons right on the street. And he says, Los Angeles is dead because you're putting criminals out here to terrorize us on the street. This is California today. And even in the good parts of California where you're away from those cities, the infection is beginning to spread all over and into you. So, California would be in my top 10 list of states that are the worst to live and work in for 2023. But yet that's not what CNBC says in this list. I want you to listen. I'm going to not give details on these. I'm just going to start at 10 and go to number 1 and see if you notice anything common about this list. Are these the worst states to live and work in 2023? Number 10, Florida. Oh my goodness. Presidential candidate is governor. How about that? Number 9 is Arkansas. Oh yeah, where Sarah Huckabee Sanders is the governor, where she was overwhelmingly elected. Oh yeah, that's a good state to put on this target list. Number 8 is Tennessee. We have a lot of interaction in Tennessee. Just came from there. Had a great experience at Dollywood. My oldest daughter's son-in-law and 4 of our grandkids live in Tennessee. Our oldest granddaughter is heading off to Union University in Jackson, Tennessee this fall. Tennessee's a wonderful state, and you can hardly move for the people trying to get in there. You can hardly buy real estate because Tennessee's being flooded with people wanting to come there, businesses wanting to start up there. Tennessee, worst places? Listen, the list goes on. Number 7 Indiana, of course, you got to hit Mike Pence's state if you're in here. Number 6 is Missouri, where a lot of really strong, godly people live and are doing some great things. Hello, Glenn and Paula, in case you're listening from Missouri. Number 5 is a tie between 5 and 4, a tie between Alabama and South Carolina. Oh, now we're really hitting home, aren't we? Yes, all of you folks in Alabama the Beautiful, you're one of the worst states to possibly live in. There are obviously in every state some bad places, but in Alabama you're going to find some of the most wonderful people and wonderful places. I've had good experience with folks from Alabama, but South Carolina is where I live right now. Is it one of the worst places to go? Well, then somebody hasn't gotten the note, because all across the upstate of South Carolina, where we are right now, the building is going on at a record pace. Companies trying to move in here, they're creating jobs, the economy is booming. And of course, they can't build houses fast enough. It's keeping the property values up at a time when some of us would really love to buy a little retirement home, yet things keep pushing up. Why? Because everybody loves South Carolina, wants to move here. I personally interviewed some of those who've moved here from out of state, from other states, and they seem to have a common theme. We wanted to move to a place where we have religious freedom, where it looks like people have some sanity with their government. Now, South Carolina's not perfect, a lot of things we need to work on, but guess what? People are coming here in record numbers. We're one of the fastest growing states in the union because people see the advantages of it. Yet they're on the list of CNBC's 10 worst states to live and work in 2023. I guess some of our folks just didn't get that memo. The last 3 are also quite telling. Number 3 is Louisiana. Now, trust me, I wouldn't like to live in Louisiana either. It's just hot. There's some other things about Louisiana that might be negative, but it's also one of those states that's solidly conservative, usually when values are listed. It's one of those places where there are a lot of good and godly people along with some of the crazy people. But Louisiana in the deep South usually votes very red on issues when they pop up. So, of course, they've got to be one of the worst places, according to CNBC. Number 2 is Oklahoma. Ditto, same thing there. A lot of great folks in Oklahoma, and they've been passing some fantastic child protection legislation and other things in Oklahoma. Some great schools there like Ouachita and Oklahoma Baptist University. It's just a great state to live in, according to a lot of the folks that are there. And then number 1 on the list, you could almost guess, couldn't you? It's Texas. That's right. Texas, that bastion of conservative Christianity, where, yes, there are a lot of folks that aren't in Texas, and it's suffering the worst of the incoming invasion of illegals coming across the southern border. But still, the folks of Texas are solid. Their legal system seems to demonstrate that. And they are friendly to religious freedom. You notice something about every single one of those states in this CNBC article. They're all red states. They are all conservative. They all have an awful lot of evangelical Christians in them. The states people are fleeing from because they are so bad, like New York State, California, and others, aren't even anywhere considered. Is this the kind of hit piece we can expect from the liberal media more and more in the future? No wonder we can't trust them anymore, and that non-trust seems to be demonstrated left and right. It's because they just lie through their teeth. Deception is just a part of what's going on. What has disturbed me the most this week is to look how that deception is out there to cover up the very thing we should be protecting. That's our next generation, to cover up the crimes against children that are taking place both nefariously and in a sneaky way, as they are often involved in, again, I'm trying to avoid the word that I know will get hit by the algorithm, as they are sold off into slavery. Let's just put it that way. Not only are those kind of laws being blocked in some places, but we've got cultures that are creating through what we would think would be safe places for children, through medical procedures, hospitals, and doctors, and schools, like our public schools, this whole idea of completely destroying a next generation by entertaining these fantasies about taking our children and first of all, sexualizing them at a very young age and then trying to convince them that they may not even be the sex they obviously are, so that we can transition them, which basically means we're going to sterilize them, make it impossible for them to reproduce the next generation. And these children are going to grow up as very confused adults who will have now lost one of the key purposes for existing, and they are going to turn into a very embittered and angry generation that is broken. And yet, it seems like we've got a whole culture that, because of the money they're going to make and all of those transitions, seems to be totally behind that, pushing it on us as if it's supposed to be the new cultural norm. Oh, friends, this culture of deception will result in the destruction of an entire generation, a wounding of countless thousands and hundreds of thousands who are allowed to go through this system because it's now the politically expedient thing to do. Friends, it is one of the surest signs of the end times. Would you have ever thought your country would have arrived in this situation? Other countries around the world entertaining it. Would you have ever thought that 10, 20, 30 years ago? Of course you wouldn't have. But now in these days, it's become championed by the left, championed by those who used to be just, differences of opinion between political parties. No, instead, we've got an entire culture that seems to be totally run by demons bent on the destruction of the next generation. Oh, friends, that's exactly what Jesus said it would be like in the days before he comes back. So with all of this terror that seems to be going on around the world, the threats of World War III, the threats against our families, the threats of persecution against Christians for standing up for what is an honest and true belief in standards that have been accepted for centuries, we find ourselves in the last days. There's no doubt, my friends. And that's a good reason for you to stay in the Word of God and be strengthened by it each and every day so that you can face all of these perilous times to come. Yes, my friends, we live in the last days. Of that I have no doubt. But you and I can be safe in the arms of God and make it through all of these things until Jesus comes back for his church. I'm not looking for the undertaker, my friends. I may die before he gets here, but I'm looking for the upper taker. That's right. And one day Jesus is going to come back. The Bible tells us he'll return with the trumpet call of God, the shout of the archangel, and the dead in Christ will rise first, and we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together to meet him in the air. So it says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Well, friends, thanks for spending some time with me today. We'll do this again next Saturday and look at some of these events taking place around us and how they fit into the very pattern laid down by the Lord Jesus and his apostles for these last days. Keep looking up, my friends. Jesus is coming. God bless you.